Mother's Day sermons are special and important. I guess for us this morning, I just want to say this. For the moms who are here today who are praying for their children and their grandchildren, who are even faced with difficult decisions for the well-being of your children and your grandchildren, I want you to see these 10 verses as a time of encouragement for you as you continue in raising your children. So that's what I want us to do this morning. Let's just read through the text together and see what Moses has to say in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. First one. Now, a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. I highlight Levi because the Levites were the spiritual leaders of the day. They were the ones who oversaw the spiritual doings of the people. This was spiritual-minded husband and a spiritual-minded wife. Verse 2. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. We'll come back to that in a second. Verse 3. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him, coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and set it among the reeds of the banks of the Nile. Now, verse 3 is that verse that kind of catches your attention. I want us to point a couple of things here as we kind of begin to walk through this text. First thing the Bible says is, but when she could no longer hide him. Now, why in the world is this mom, who's not mentioned in verse 1, is she trying to hide her child? Well, if you go back to the end of chapter 1 of the same book, in the last 3 verses, in chapter 1, verse 20, 21, and 22, the nation of Israel was in Egypt at the time, and they were growing and they were expanding. They were doing great things, and Pharaoh became worried and concerned about the expansion of the nation of Israel in Egypt. So verse 20 comes along. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very numerous. Since the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Verse 22, Pharaoh then commanded all his people, you must throw every son born into the Hebrews into the Nile, but let every daughter live. And so the ruler of the land, Pharaoh, sends down this edict and says, listen, if the Hebrew people have a son, then you need to take him and you need to throw him into the Nile River for them to be killed so the nation of Israel will stop this growth and this multiply. Then chapter 2 begins. Immediately, you have this husband and this wife who have a baby. Verse 2 says they don't just have any baby, they have a son. And then the Bible says in verse 2 that they saw the son, they saw that he was beautiful, and they took him and they hid him for 3 months. But then verse 3 says there came a moment when she could no longer hide him. For 3 months, this mom had done everything to protect this little baby. For 3 months, every time in the night when this baby would cry or need to be fed or need to be a diaper change or have clothes or about to be taken care of, this mom would get up in the night, sneak over and take care of this precious 3-year-old baby, knowing in her mind that if people out there ever knew that she had a son in here, that he would be taken and he would be killed by thrown into the Nile. For 3 months, you got to feel the weight of this story, the magnitude of the moment. For 3 months, this mom held this precious baby, knowing that if word got out that he was alive, he would be killed. And then verse 3 comes a moment in this mom's life when she realized she could no longer hide him. That there came a moment in this precious mom's life when she realized that she had exhausted, she had come to the end of her capabilities to hide and protect this precious baby. I read this quote here. She did what she could to save her child. Then, when she could do no more, she depended totally on the faithfulness of God. That she said, for 3 months, I got this, I can do this. For 3 months, I can take care of him. For 3 months, I can protect him. For 3 months, I can put a hedge up and make sure that nobody finds out. The word never gets out. For 3 months, and then something happened and she realized, I've come as far as I can go. That she came to a place in her life where she realized that I have exhausted my capabilities of protecting this baby. And there comes a moment in her life where she realized that she couldn't do anymore, so she totally depended on the faithfulness of God. See, for you, you're in one of those two spots right now. As a mom, as a parent, you're trying to do everything you can. Maybe they're in kindergarten. Maybe they're in elementary. Maybe they're in junior high. Maybe they're in high school. Maybe they're in college. Maybe they're out of college. Maybe they're in their 40s or 50s. And you've done everything you can their entire life to make sure that everything's okay, to make sure that they're going to be taken care of, to make sure that everything's going to be all right. And for your entire life and the life of this baby, you have given yourself completely. But there comes a moment in your life, there comes a moment in my life, there comes a moment in the lives of parents where we realize, I can't do any more. I can't. And so this mom, guys, just jump into the story. Just my mind has been swimming in this story. Just jump in. This moment where this mom realizes, I'm going to have to put this baby in the Nile. I'm going to have to place this precious 3-month-old baby in the Nile and leave him there. So she placed the child in it. She set it among the reeds of the bank of the Nile. May I make, and look, I when it comes to, I don't even know what to say. So I got to say something, or you got a problem. He says this. Here's what I've learned. Now, you guys know way more than me about parenting, way. But here's what I've learned, and here's what we talk about at our house. From this text first, we must parent out of faith, not fear. That we must parent out of faith, not fear. So she comes to a place in her life where she realizes, I've got to set this baby among the reeds. And so she takes a step of faith. I was listening to a conference. The speaker was speaking, and he asked this question. How many of you in this room would raise your hand and say, I want my child, this is the question, how many of you wish your child had stronger faith? So he asked the question across the room, how many of you wish that your kindergartner, your third grader, fifth grader, 30-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, how many of you wish that the children in your life had stronger faith? Well, hands go across the room. I wish my kid had stronger faith. I wish my kid had stronger faith. I wish my kid had stronger faith. And then this is the very next thing he said, this here. While it's good that everyone desires that our children have a stronger faith, the truth is that what we see in our children's faith is a mirror image of our own faith. So the issue is not their faith, but your faith. So this 3-year-old child, this 3-month-old child didn't have the cognitive ability to say to his mom, put me out in the reeds. I'm going to take a step of faith. He was 3 months old. He didn't know up from down. But his mom came to a position in her life where she realized, I want my child, I want this family. She had an older brother and an older daughter. And in this moment, that we're going to take this moment of faith, and I don't have a clue what's going to happen. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know how this is going to happen, but I'm going to take a step of faith. And moms and dads, if we want to see our children take steps of faith, then we have to be willing to take steps of faith. Because why? They are watching us. They're witnessing you. When you think they're in bed at night not paying attention, they're listening to your conversations. When you're driving down the road and you think they're playing games in the back of the car, they are listening to you. They're watching you. Remember, who's the one writing this story? Moses. He is 3 months old when this story takes place. And I can think in my mind the moment in Moses' life where his mom sat down and said, Moses, there came a place in my life where I couldn't do any more. I came a moment in my life when your dad and I couldn't do it. And so we took a step of faith and we placed you in a basket and we set you out amongst the reeds. And our kids are watching us. They're watching you in church. They're watching you in Sunday school. They're watching you at ball fields. They're watching you in life. And if we want to raise up a generation of children, if we want to raise up a generation of men and women who serve in the body, who serve in the community, who live great lives of faith, then it's going to come from us as parents. She set him in the basket. You say, what does this have to do with fear? Billy read it a second ago. Go to the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. By faith, Moses, after he was born, was hidden by his parents for 3 months because they saw that the child was beautiful and they didn't fear the king's edict. Mom and dad in this moment are not parenting out of posture of fear. They don't fear the king's edict. That's not the issue here. They are parenting out of posture of faith. And let's be honest. Steps of faith as parenting is hard. We don't put our kids in the middle of a Nile River with crocodiles and currents and rain and difficulty, but we put our kids out in the world and we let them go, and it's hard. But I just want to say to you, and this is a lesson that we're learning at our house, and we talked about this last night. I just want to say to you to come along hand in hand, arm in arm, and say, listen, let's parent out of faith, not fear. Let's raise up men boys who will stand up and be faith warriors in the church. Let's raise up ladies who will grow up to be warriors and leaders within the church as we parent and lead. I wonder if Moses asked his mom and daddy, hey, why'd you do that? Why didn't you just guys hide me for 3 more months after that or 4 more months after that? Why'd you put me in a basket in the middle of the Nile? And my heart tells me, and I'll show you in a little bit, that Moses' mom and daddy sat him down and said this, because we trusted you in the hands of God. We trusted. Had no idea what was going to take place, but they trusted God. Second, same verse 3. If you go back to verse 3 of chapter 2. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him, and she coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it. She set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And this, just come and hear my heart. Hear my heart. Because we're in this side by side, arm in arm, tear in tear together. There comes a moment, Mom and Dad, when faith has to become action. There comes a moment when you can say, I have all the faith in the world, I have all the faith that you can have, but that faith has to turn into an action. And so the action of the faith of that mom in that moment was her releasing her child into the Nile. So I would say this, release your children. My wife and I were talking last night. Can you imagine, just stop. Just close your eyes. Can you imagine the moment when this mom had to take her hand off of that basket? The moment when this mom, I just picture in my mind, she had to let go. She had to let go. And in this moment, she was releasing Moses. This was his ultimate step of faith. This was the moment when she said to Moses, the baby, and ultimately to the world, I am trusting the sovereign hand of God to protect my child, can do greater than what I can do holding him real close. And so she let him go. Here's what the psalmist says in Psalms 127. Verse 3, keep going. Sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord, offspring, a reward. Listen to this, verse 4. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the sons born in one's youth. I love this. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the sons born to one in youth. In fact, this is what he says in verse 5. He says this, happy is the man who's filled his quiver with them. They will never be put to shame when they speak with their enemies at the city gate. But you know what the psalmist says in verse 4? Go back up, Emily, verse 4. He says this, like arrows. See, for you and I, we begin to view our children as arrows. We release them. We grip, we pull, we hold back, and we let them go. And we launch them into kindergarten, we launch them into elementary, we launch them into junior high, we launch them into high school, we launch them into college, we launch them into getting married, we launch them into the real world. But we pull back and we release and we launch them and we let them go. Just as this young mom who was taking a remarkable step of faith stepped back and realized, I'm going to have to take my hand off of the basket and I'm going to have to release it and let this baby go. She moved from faith to action. That she wasn't parenting out of faith or parenting out of fear, she was parenting out of faith, but that moment, it became a moment of release when she let them go. And that's got to be the hardest thing. I sat right here last week with our children as they walked across the stage, and I wrote back in my journal on that morning. I left and I thought, I was thinking about this text, and I was thinking about yesterday when they had the graduates walk across the stage. And I thought, just in that picture, you have Sumner, who walks across the stage, who graduates from kindergarten. You have Emily, who walks across the stage, who graduates from high school. You have Caroline, who walks across the stage, who graduates from college. And then you have Morgan, who walks across the stage, who this past year got married. And I went home and I thought, I've done the kindergarten thing. I'm going to do the high school thing and the college and the marriage. And at some point in my life, I'm going to have to say to my children, I am releasing you. And I want to live a life of faith and instill in them into their life that they honor the Lord, that they honor each other, that they live generously, that they forgive, and that they care and love for people. But at some point, you release them. I don't want to belittle the point and labor all this, but I just want to say this. For some, this morning, God may be speaking to you and saying, if Moses' mom can trust me in the weeds of the Nile River with a 3-month-old, you can trust me with your child. You can trust me. So you parent out of faith, not fear. You release your child into the hands of the sovereign hand of God. Read on to the text. Verse 4, here's what the Bible says. Verse 4. Stay with me. Y'all are out there cold. I'm up here sweating like a crazy person. Then his sister stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. This is where it gets good, okay? Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe at the Nile while her servant girls walked along the riverbank. It just so happens that she saw the basket among the reeds. Sent a slave girl. She took it, opened it, saw him, the child. And there he was, a little boy, crying. She felt sorry for him and said, this is one of the Hebrew boys. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, should I go and call a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse the boy for you? Verse 8, go. Then Pharaoh's daughter told her, so the girl went and called the boy's mother. Verse 9. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child, nursing for me, and I'm going to give you money for it. So the woman took the boy and nursed him. Verse 10. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because he said, I drew him out of the water. Now, I don't know if you follow that whole storyline or not. Maybe it's your first time to hear the story, but here's what happens. The baby's in the water. Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh, who sent the edict out to kill all the boys, comes down with her servants. There, as they're in the water, there's a basket that just so happens to be the same spot that Moses was in. As Pharaoh's daughter was standing there, she heard a baby crying. She looked over there and saw the basket. She opened up the basket, and it just so happened there being a boy in there. And it just so happened that the boy was a Hebrew boy. And it just so happens that in the other side of the bank was the little boy's sister, who speaks up to Pharaoh's daughter and just so happens to say, should I go get a Hebrew woman who's nursing who can take care of the boy? And Pharaoh's daughter just so happens to say, yes, I think that's a great idea. Then the daughter runs home. Now, can you imagine as Miriam runs into the house, knocks on the door, runs in and says, Mom, you're not going to believe this. You're going to get to raise Moses, the baby. What? Yes, come with me. Moses' mom shows up, walks in, gets to raise this little boy whom she just released into the water. You step back from this story and you think, my goodness, isn't God an absolutely incredible God who works out the details? In fact, I would even say this to you and I this morning. Trust the Lord with your children. Trust the Lord. When you and I, as parents, step back. God, I don't know how this is going to work. I have no idea where this is going to go. But here's what I do know. I'm trusting you with my children. I'm trusting you. I'm laying them at your feet. This is the quote. Is it on there? See the quote? We may not know how our faithful actions will work out in the end, but we trust that God has the best interest of our children at heart. This mom had no idea how her faithful actions would work out in the end. She had no idea that this was going to be the outcome, but she trusted that God had the best interest of her children at heart. And this is it, moms and dads. We may never know. Our kids we may never see faithful actions that we take in living generously and faithfully tithing and supporting the ministries of the church. And we may never see how much the impact of our faithful actions in living kind and going on mission and serving in the church and in the community. We may never see the impact that our kids may notice, but we trust that God is working in the hearts of our children. We trust that God is working in the midst of this. But I want to say this. Now, just come in here real close. Did you notice that Moses' mom is not mentioned in verses 1 through 10? Stay with me. In verse 1 it says, a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. In fact, let's go on a journey, shall we? Go a few chapters to Exodus chapter 6. Same book, Exodus chapter 6. Moses is giving a genealogy of his family. Moses, in Exodus chapter 6, verse 20, Amram married his father's sister, Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses, and Amram lived 137 years. Now stay with me. Moses is given a genealogy of his family. In the midst of the genealogy, he throws in that his mom, in the story, in verse 20. It's the first woman that's mentioned in Exodus chapter 6, verse 20. So Moses then names his mom. Then you go down to verse 26. It was this Aaron and Moses whom the Lord told, bring the Israelites out of the land of Egypt according to the military divisions. Moses and Aaron were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, in order to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Then, listen. You begin to see the story unfold. Moses doesn't mention mom in Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 6 comes around. Moses begins to lay out the genealogy of the families. Then Moses lays out the genealogy of his family and where he came from. And he says, oh, by the way, my mom is Jochebed. And my mom is the one who put me in the weeds in that moment. And he had remembered the story of Moses as a child that had been passed up through the line of the family members. Then you get down to verse 26, and it's Aaron and Moses, the brothers of the mom Jochebed, who put her son in the Nile, who went to Pharaoh and told Pharaoh to let the Israelites go and to separate them from the Egyptians. It's this Moses and his brother Aaron who are the ones who would go and stand in front of Pharaoh the king and say to this king, let my people of God go and free the nation of Israel out of Egypt. And then you step back and you realize that there would one day come one who was greater than Moses. This baby who was born was the one who led the nation of Israel out of Egypt into the shores of the promised land and freed the nation of Israel from the bondage and oppression of the Egyptians. But there would one day come one who was even greater than Moses. Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. The Bible says this in verse 1. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters, who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to the one who was appointed him, just as Moses was in all of God's household. For Jesus is considered worthy of more glory than Moses, just as the builder has more honor than the house. Now every house is built by someone, but the one who built everything is God. Moses was faithful as a servant in all of God's household as a testimony to what would be said in the future, but Christ was faithful as a son over all the household, and we are the household if we hold on to our confession and the hope which we boast. And the writer of Hebrews reminds us that there was one who came that was greater than Moses, one that would come who was more faithful than even this baby in this basket in the Nile was. And one day, the mom of this one greater, Jesus, would have to go against the call of a man named Caesar to kill the babies. As Pharaoh called for the babies to be born then, Caesar called for the babies to be born in Jesus' life. And one day, as Moses was placed in a basket in the Nile, Jesus was placed on a cross, the cross of Calvary. And one day, as this mom, Jochebed, who stood at a distance watching her baby in the middle of the Nile, this one Mary, the mother of Jesus, would stand at the foot of the cross and watch Jesus die for the sins of the nations. And this one in the basket would one day deliver the nation of Israel from the bondage of Egypt. But there was one who would come, Jesus, who would be greater, who would deliver not just the nation, but the nations. And not from another nation, but for the sins of the world. And we read this story in Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, and we see the faithfulness of mom and the effects of how a nation of Israel was delivered by the Egyptians from the hand of Pharaoh through the leadership of Moses, pointing to one day when one would come who would be greater than Moses, who would deserve more glory than Moses, who would deserve more honor than Moses, and that would be Jesus Christ, who wouldn't be placed in a basket, but would be placed on a cross and would deliver not just the nation from Egypt, but deliver the nations from sin. For you and I, we step back and we realize, as we take steps of faith in our life, we never know the impact, the lives of people who will be impacted, the differences that will be made. As we release our children, as we raise them in fear, not in faith, as we trust them into the sovereign hand of God, as we allow them to go. When we go, we teach them the gospel. You know it. We teach them that God is sovereign and He's holy and He's a righteous God. We teach them that we offend. Your kids sin, my kids sin, your sin, I sin, we all sin. And that sin separates from a holy God. The Bible says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But we believe that the Bible teaches that if we're going to have access to God the Father, it's going to come through God the Son, through Jesus Christ's death on the cross of Calvary. But we believe that every single person has a decision to make. You're either going to trust God with your life or you're going to reject Him. We believe eternity matters. Eternity awaits you and I in a place called hell and a place called heaven. But this is where it happens for you and I. The gospel brings about life transformation. The gospel allows you and I to parent, not out of fear, but out of faith. The gospel allows us to trust the Lord in releasing our children to the world, to be gospel lights as arrows. And the gospel allows us to trust the Lord with our children, with our lives, as we lead them. And so I don't know where you are this morning as a parent. I'm right beside you. It's hard. But may we be moms and dads who say to our children, you are gifts from God, and we place you back into the hands of the one who blessed us with you.